Welcome back to another episode of the Greener Tech podcast. Today I'm joined by James Sterling, Communications and Engagement Manager at Bristol City Leap. It's a project looking to invest over £1 billion into Bristol to decarbonise the city over the next 20 years. In this episode, we cover a range of topics in regards to how the project started, where it is now, some of the barriers that they've faced in getting to this point, and also what technology they'll be looking to incorporate to make the biggest difference possible in Bristol City's shared heat network. Welcome back to another episode of the Greener Tech podcast. Today, I'm joined by James Sterling, the Communications and Engagement Manager at Bristol City Leap, a project aiming to decarbonise Bristol over the next 20 years. I will, however, let James give a much better intro into what they're up to. James, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles. It's good to be here.
Well, we'll run straight into it. And I know we've had some dialogue in the past and actually first met yourself, I think it was the kickoff event in Bristol a few weeks back at the Bristol Beacon.
The Green Mingle.
The Green Mingle.
Yeah.
So that was when I first really got an understanding of what this project was looking to do. But I think many people are still, because it's first of its kind.
It is. It's a world first.
It's the first of its kind.
That's what we keep telling people. Yeah.
In the world, which is obviously a brilliant headline for everybody. But it also means that nobody really knows what you're up to here. So if you wouldn't mind, in your words, giving us an understanding of what this project's looking to do and how it started as well.
Yeah, so I think there's quite a long origin story behind Bristol City Leap. In essence, Bristol City Leap is a brand new, very innovative partnership to deliver decarbonisation at city scale. So we're looking at kind of all types of technology and delivering over the next 20 years £1 billion worth of investment into Bristol's energy system. So this is going to transform the city. This is a really, really different way of doing things. It's the coming together of public and private sector organisations, for the greater good. So to deliver, at least over the next 5 years, 140,000 tonnes of CO2 reduction for the city, which is an incredible amount for one project. 1,000 jobs that will create within the industry, but across kind of all types of skills agendas. And, importantly as well, kind of really kind of honing in on things that are important to local people and tackling kind of social issues. So we have a huge commitment to social value, which is delivering nearly £62 million worth of social value over the next 5 years. Part of that is job creation, but a great deal of that is also community funding. So money that we will invest into community organisations and neighbourhoods to enable Bristolians to kind of deliver their own projects and have a meaningful stake and essentially democratise the local energy system.
Yeah, and where it all started then as well, because I think that was a really interesting point which I discussed with you previously of how this came about, because nobody's walked this frontier before, so it wasn't like you could just look at the blueprint or claim somebody else's idea, but where did it initially start?
I think it's very Bristol. It's a very Bristol thing to do. I grew up here and, hearing stories of, the innovators and the pioneers, the Banksys, the Massive Attacks, the Brunels. This is very in the spirit of Brunel, in that we've assessed a problem, looked at a challenge, and tried to find a new and innovative way of doing things. As you say, there was no template, there was no blueprint that we could follow, which makes things very tricky. It means that we had to do a great deal of work over a number of years to get to the point where we're at, having just launched. But also it presents a great opportunity for us to, as per usual, kind of put Bristol on the map as a leading energy city. Now, where we started with Bristol City Leap was really looking at kind of what the local authority was doing around kind of tackling climate change and over the last 5 or 6 years, Bristol City Council's playing a tremendous role, really, in leadership in that field, and has invested, I think it's over now, 100 million into sort of clean tech or kind of renewable projects. So, Bristol Council was the first English council to build and operate its own wind turbines. We've got two large wind turbines in Avonmouth, as well as its own solar farm and lots of renewables across its own kind of building stock. Now, looking at that level of investment, to an ordinary person, they'd say that's a lot of money. That's brilliant. And actually, in terms of getting the city further on its trajectory to decarbonisation and hitting those lofty targets of being carbon neutral as a city by 2030, we kind of really quickly realised it simply wasn't enough, and it was never going to be enough. We were reliant in the past on some funding from Europe, which was fantastic. Enabled us to do incredible things in energy. That obviously kind of fell off a cliff, unfortunately, with the referendum and subsequently sort of leaving the EU. We've also been reliant on government grant funding here and there, but it's quite a competitive way of doing things. You're not assured that the project that you set out to deliver will have funding allocated to it, and therefore you'll be able to deliver for the people of Bristol. So we kind of looked at a new way of kind of bringing in investment into the city, and that was through public and private sector partnerships. So we set about essentially pulling together what we call a prospectus. So it was quite a thin document, but full of really interesting detail about the projects that were being delivered within the city and the opportunities that we foresaw over the next sort of 10 to 20 years. Tallying all of that up through feasibility studies, looking across heat networks and renewables and energy efficiency and sort of modal shift and electric vehicle sort of infrastructure and everything in between, smart energy, smart tech, we came to a figure of around sort of 950 million. So way more than the council would ever be able to find down the back of the sofa, or ever probably be able to lobby government for. So we put this prospectus out to the open market. We did a soft market test, I suppose, for want of a better term, and we asked the private sector if there was interest in a particular area of the prospectus, a particular type of technology, or a particular sort of region within Bristol where investment could be something they were interested in. And also what that partnership could look like in the future. And where we landed through all of those conversations, the 200 or so organisations that got in touch with us and expressed an interest was basically around kind of a joint venture, so something that was part owned by the public and part owned by the private sector partner. And that's what we ran the procurement on. Mm-hmm. And then 4 years later, City Leap was born. I no longer work for the council. I work for Bristol City Leap as a sort of separate entity, which is fantastic. We've just had our launch event as well, which went very well. And it's an organisation that's 50% owned by the council, 50% owned by Ameresco, which are an American energy services company, a clean tech organisation.
Yeah, so. And with anything, so. My view of it as well, that it's an investment in terms of monetary investment as well. Is that been put in by Ameresco?
There's lots of different sort of sources of funding. So Bristol City Leap is a partnership between Bristol City Council and Ameresco. Ameresco, as part of the partnership, have brought in an essential subcontractor, so a kind of sub-partner essentially, called Vattenfall Heat UK, and Vattenfall are a big name in Europe in terms of heat networks delivery. So Vattenfall are putting in some money to further develop the existing heat network. There's other sources of funding as well that will come through. So we're launching a crowdfunding platform later this year, so that Bristolians will be able to actually invest in projects on their doorstep and get a return on those investments as well, which is great. And then there's kind of third party finance as well. So we're looking at lots of different models for funding this. There is no expectation and no obligation for the council to put any money into this, and that was a key thing in the times that we live in, with ever shrinking public budgets. But the council retains the right to do so. If there's an opportunity that the council sees that they would like to invest in, they're able to do that.
Yeah, and with that, say, being an investment as well, how. So as myself, as a fellow Bristolian, if I was going to invest into the crowdfunding platform, how am I expected to then see a return on my investment? Where is that essentially being calculated and money generated from?
So it depends on the project type. I would say some calculations are fairly straightforward. So if we say took a large wind turbine in Avonmouth or somewhere else, sort of in the the kind of the acceptable region for wind turbines, which tends to be Avonmouth, you could see that actually the investment would go into the asset. The asset's up and running. The energy that asset generates generates a profit. It's sold back to the grid, or it's a PPA to an organisation. Once that asset's paid off, that kind of generated energy and revenue stream is there for profit, and that's what's paid back to those investors.
Yeah.
With other kind of assets, it's slightly trickier. So if you were investing in, this wouldn't necessarily be a project type, but just an example, if you were investing in a new EV charge point in your neighbourhood, that's obviously a much smaller asset, requires much less investment, much faster payback in that regard. But you would see a profit from the usage of that charge point. So you or I plug our electric car in, for an hour. The hourly rate is kind of where the revenue stream comes from.
Yeah, no, interesting, because I was actually speaking to my dad about this, and I was like, I don't know, like any good investment. He was asking me, well, where do you see the return on it? And I thought, I don't know, but I will find out for you. And especially, I think I had in my mind as well around the heat energy network as well, around the heat network, sorry,
Yeah.
how that's going about, because I know there's a huge amount of infrastructure going in at the moment, especially around South Bristol, around Bedminster. I think that's going to supply.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, really interrupted my
Ruining
route
your
to
commute,
work.
yeah.
But how is it then? So that's connecting some 700-800 flats, I think, when the apartments are fully built.
That's the Bedminster Green development. Yeah. So the heat network is, and not a lot of people realise this, the heat network's already connected to over 1,000 properties in Bristol. So some of those are dwellings, some of those are kind of tower blocks, social housing, and some of them are businesses and commercial and industrial. Now the kind of the revenue stream from that one, it's key infrastructure. It's huge in terms of the installation. It requires a lot of, as you said, roads being dug up just once, and obviously the infrastructure itself has quite a lofty kind of price tag attached to it as well. But it is a long-term asset, so those assets are set to last for kind of upwards of 50 years. So those kind of sales, I suppose, for heat. So if you and I were connected to the heat network in our homes, we're paying our energy bills. That's essentially kind of the revenue stream for the heat network is, once you've paid off the asset, then the rest is kind of, an ongoing charge.
Yeah, and people then that are moving into these new builds that aren't in social housing, but then in private.
Yeah.
Can they opt in, opt out? How does that work? Is it something which is still yet to be ironed out?
So there's, the regulation from government is coming. It's been coming for a number of years now, but it's not in place just yet. So central government haven't got a sort of regulatory policy in place for the heat network. What we do have is the Heat Trust guidelines and the guidance from Heat Trust, and that's kind of what we comply with, which is as well as our own sort of ethos around developing a heat network, which is basically around kind of fair and transparent pricing. Which means that we'll always be upfront about the pricing, but it'll always be fair, which is in these times really, really important, particularly with the cost of living crisis. And I don't know if you're connected to a gas boiler in your home, but your energy bills have probably changed quite dramatically in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, and it's something that we're really, really passionate about. The other thing is around reliability. So ensuring that there is a service contract in place for everyone that's connected to the heat network. There's no longer a scenario where a tower block with 200 flats has 200 boilers in it. So this is a single source of heat with a single maintenance contract, so that if anything goes wrong with it, there's a policy in place that ensures that it will be fixed within an acceptable period of time, rather than if your boiler goes down, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever you can get to come and fix that boiler, and sometimes that
whatever
could be
price as well.
And at whatever price as well. I had an issue with my boiler just after New Year's, and it was a middle of the night issue. I was just going to bed, and I kind of started going up the stairs, realised there was water everywhere, and it's pricey, very pricey. And so to avoid that, I think that's really, really important, to give people surety, and also to keep people safe. From a business perspective, what we're doing obviously with heat networks means that you no longer have a requirement for quite massive floor plates for plant rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes, I guess, in a commercial scenario, kind of more usable space. That's more office space or more storage, or kind of whatever you need for your business. Your heating is generated essentially off-site and then pumped into the building.
Yeah, and I was reading into it as well, and I thought sounds really interesting. And
Yeah.
I think for me, I haven't had much exposure to the way of heat networks, and I did on my googling before today was I know there's a handful of cities in the UK already,
Yeah.
and I think first what might be good to give me an idea as well is in my head as well. It's that the collaboration is great because even with Vattenfall's and Amoresco's knowledge, they still don't have access to the houses, do they? So through the collaboration then with Bristol City Leap, then ultimately they're granted access to those houses.
I mean, I think there's a number of things, I suppose, that are not just Bristol Council, but any local authority can kind of bring to the table in this type of partnership. And that some of that is kind of convening influence, which is, the levers that you can pull with, like-minded city partners, universities, blue light services, that sort of thing. But yeah, the other thing is kind of, land and assets. So if you own, a great deal of social housing, tower blocks and low rises and the like, then that's kind of, that's an area that can be developed and improved, definitely. I mean, I would say Bristol is quite unique as well in terms of policy. So Bristol has a number of kind of very supportive policies. Not to get too technical, but we call it kind of a heat hierarchy area, which means that if you're a new developer, if you were building a new office block in the city centre and you were in range of a heat network connection, you're obligated to connect to that heat network, because it's a low carbon way of providing your heating. But also it's on trend with how Bristol wants to function as a city going forward. We want things to be interconnected, and that's kind of one of the key premises of Bristol City Leap is we can do lots and lots of different projects with lots of different technology on a home or on a commercial estate. But actually, unless those technologies are joined up and talk to each other, you'll never really realise the full benefits. And that's where smart tech and smart energy comes into play, is the kind of glue that binds all of those sometimes disparate bits of tech together to make a single solution.
Yeah, and as the name of this podcast suggests as well, we've got tech in the name. So
I keep saying tech.
just the mention of technologies has just got me wondering, what tech is it you're looking at?
Yep.
You mentioned it's a 20-year project, so
Yep.
I always think we need to prepare for the future. So you build for the future, you don't really build for now.
Yeah.
So what tech is it you're looking to include? What amendments are you making to people's housing, which is going to make the big differences then that you're hoping for?
Yeah, so I mean, in the short term, our focus has to be on the tech that's available to us now. So Bristol has an objective to be carbon neutral by 2030. That is, just a few years away now. So our initial focus now is on, classic renewables. Looking at kind of the solars and the winds. Looking at kind of the expansion of the heat network is far out of the city centre as we can take it sort of in the coming years, and also kind of connecting to other kind of regions as well, sort of further up to sort of the north of the city, possibly into South Gloss as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously kind of looking at the kind of, I guess, the less sexy technologies, if we can call them technologies, I think we probably should. Insulation. So kind of the basic stuff that will improve the comfort and the health of your home. The loft, the cavity wall insulation. The new and individual heating systems like heat pumps for homes. And I mean, I think those are the kind of core focus at the moment, as well as kind of mobility and EV charging and whatnot. But as you say, Charles, it is a 20-year project. So we've deliberately built this project with flexibility, because we don't know what's on the horizon. There's a genius out there right now who's working on something that's going to completely transform the way that we live our lives in the coming years, and we need to be open and receptive to that. We are, I guess, one thing we're not looking at through Bristol City Leap is hydrogen, and that's primarily around the timescales and how hydrogen is developing at the moment. Personally, I think it is a transition technology for the country with its 2050 target currently, but for our timescales, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly right in saying, and to be honest, the amount of difference, especially from an EPC standpoint as well on housing, how much difference correct installation or any installation and double glaze can make is incredible. So, and I know there is some regulation upcoming as well, isn't there? And I don't know how well it's going to be enforced around what houses need to be on that chart as well. One thing I was wondering, this £1 billion, which is being kind of brought in to be invested into the city to decarbonise it. Yeah. Are we at a hard cap with that?
It's kind of upwards of £1 billion. So I think our commitment to the city over the next 5 years alone, so this is contractual, is a £424 million worth of investment over the next 5 years. Our workings out and our kind of refreshed business plan that we've just put out actually to the city in the last month or so suggests that actually we could probably deliver somewhere around 616 million. So a massive uplift and a massive step forward towards carbon neutrality. Obviously, the carbon savings that go with it, which is great. That's just from our exploration of, okay, so this is kind of the way the world looked a year ago. And actually since then we've found so many more opportunities, and, our ability to deliver has really been sort of amplified, which is fantastic. So the billion figure over 20 years, I think if we're going to do 600 in the next 5, you kind of do the maths, I suppose. It really depends on uptake, I suppose. And, we've got an open call out to the city at the moment, not just in terms of supply chain kind of sort of generation, so trying to get organisations to work with us to support our delivery of these projects, because we're going to need a lot of installers over the next 20 years, but also to organisations that are perhaps starting their carbon decarbonisation journey or looking for support. They may have set a target. They may have declared a climate emergency as an organisation, but they don't have the resources or the wherewithal or the kind of technical understanding to as to how to get there. Our message is clear. We are here within the city, and we're here to support. We will obviously do a great deal across the council's estate, but we're also there for the commercial and the industrial sector, as well as other public sector partners.
Yeah, with the job side of it as well, you mentioned, so it's creating thousands of jobs. Are those skills already readily available? Because I'm thinking of it in how fast this sector is going to grow, especially in Bristol, because there is this huge surge of investment coming in.
Yeah.
There's going to be a surge of workload. Therefore, there's going to be a massive requirement for the right skills.
Yeah.
Are they already there, or are you thinking that part of this investment might be to upskill local workers to build that ecosystem into Bristol as well?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I think we could have a podcast on that question, in isolation, really, because it is absolutely key. So, I think one of the things I'd kick off with really is that we know there's a massive skills gap. There's a labour gap as well. Heat pumps is a really good example. In fact, cladding and insulation is a good example. If we kind of want to, roll out a huge kind of cladding program or a huge kind of insulation program at the moment, you'll get some local firms that will respond to it, which is brilliant because that local knowledge is here. But the vast majority of people will come over from Cardiff. So that's not Bristol jobs. Mm-hmm. That is local southwest-ish regional jobs, which is good. But we don't have that capacity sort of locally. So part of this is, I guess, tied to the fact that there have been a number of government schemes over the years which have created, a major boom. The kind of Green Homes grant was a good example of that. Lots of funding suddenly available. Lots and lots of organisations interested in delivering those projects. Huge pipeline of work on the horizon, which is fantastic. And then suddenly the funding is cut for whatever reason, and organisations and contractors are left with too many staff with the skills that they don't necessarily need. With Bristol City Leap, we've got that kind of 20-year view. So 20-year funding, also 20-year kind of horizon scan of projects and pipelines. So we're able to give organisations that surety that actually, if they invest in their staff, if they recruit and up staff, if they reskill or teach their staff new skills, actually it's going to be time well spent and money well spent, and actually it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I've heard that, the longevity side of things with a few projects, be that public transport, and that's a whole different area again. But I didn't realise that. I didn't think of it, say, being the case for some of these projects for home installation and areas like that. I think I probably just took it for granted, to be honest, and I didn't realise how much uptake there was, and therefore what happened when that funding did suddenly stop.
Yeah, so I think the market's definitely had its fingers burnt in the past, and understandably wary. So I myself and my colleagues talk to suppliers, and I think you can generally see hope and enthusiasm in their eyes when you're talking about kind of a 20-year project, because we never have that surety. Even in local government, we can do a fairly large scheme. You've never really got that kind of longevity of a kind of a secure and insured funding stream. So, but I mean that's kind of one side of it, I suppose. The other side is the skills, and how we can support and develop those skills kind of locally, and hopefully kind of create that ripple effect to inform what's going on nationally as well, and help with some of that policy. And part of Bristol City Leap is around, as I said earlier, social value, and part of that is kind of creating the opportunities and starting to, I guess, get kind of Bristol thinking about the future and what the future of jobs looks like. So so we're going into schools and we're talking to kids, at really like grassroots level about, these are the opportunities, these are the jobs of the future. We're going into schools and obviously colleges and higher and further education bodies as well, and liaising with the colleges about, actually, these are the types of things that will be, big in the kind of sort of in terms of the labour market going forward. These are the things that we really need to push, and we have some influence over that. But my message to, kind of kids and young people who are thinking about their kind of career opportunities going forward is that actually it doesn't really matter what you go into. Yes, we need those kind of, highly skilled jobs, the heat pump installers and the solar technicians and all the rest of it. But actually, if your career path is one that where you want to be an accountant, or you want to be a marketing person, or a call center operative, that's fine. And as I always say, any job is a green job in a green economy. If you're working in a green economy, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You have to follow that path.
Yeah, and that economy of air source heat pumps is an interesting one. I think it definitely splits decision on what people think. Some people think it's still an emerging technology, and I think when we look at the uptake of it in the UK, I think I read a stat fairly recently that in 2021, the figure is 1.48, so let's just say 1.5 houses per 1,000 houses had an air source heat pump, which was the lowest in Western Europe, but the leader of which has only got 14 or 15 per 1,000 homes, and I think that was Sweden or Norway. But is that, obviously the uptake's not there, so does that suggest that we should be looking at other alternatives instead of, because we've obviously got so much success happening with connecting 1,000 homes in one, say, surge within the heat network. Should we be pushing that more than different agendas, say that being air source heat pumps, or do you see that we should be pushing everything in equilibrium?
I think there's an augmented view, really. So I think it needs to be part of the puzzle. It's not going to work for every property. So I mean, we've just opened, or we've just commissioned rather, the largest water source heat pump in the country, in Castle Park, which you may have seen if you're in Left-Handed Giant. Just look over the
No
water.
comment.
It's right there. I'm sure you've been there. And that's an amazing piece of technology. Right on our doorstep. It's becoming. I keep joking about it. It's becoming Bristol's rapidly becoming Bristol's most popular tourist attraction because we keep getting requests to go for a visit and a walk around this amazing asset. And that's a wholly renewable, zero carbon piece of technology that will serve hundreds to 1,000 kind of properties within the city. Those properties won't be connected to individual air source or kind of ground source heat pumps. They'll be connected to the wider heat network. That the heat network won't serve the entirety of the city, so it will cover as much ground as possible. But there's still going to be a need for other forms of heating, and electrified forms of heating, essentially. The main thing for us really is to move Bristol away from gas and break that reliance on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And
does it make more economical sense as well? Because I think the figure, it was around 600,000 or 700,000, wasn't it, that it cost to build the Castle Park heat pump? I think around that figure. But
million.
was it? Okay.
It's a really big piece of kit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, a singular device in somebody's home, they're upwards of 8K, 10K plus, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
For a singular air source heat pump, and it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
we've got enough resources. I think natural resources in Bristol. When we look at, if you're looking for waterways and consistent waterways, then we've probably got enough to look at more projects like that. Albeit I know it comes from an investment point of view and having those resources initially. But yeah, I think I quite like the idea, I think, of a community-based heat network. I just think, especially if you can have more control over that and as it works, and disconnecting yourself sometimes from a larger body, or even disconnecting yourself from fossil fuels as well. I do quite like that. And I think a lot of people, they always associate investment with emerging technology as well. And I know it's something we briefly touched on, but I suppose, how much of this do you think is going to be utilized in emerging technology? Would it almost be treated as an investment vehicle for some emerging technology and businesses?
I think there's every chance of that being the case. Yeah, definitely. So, we obviously kind of liaise very closely with central government and regional government as well, with, sort of West of England Combined Authority. But also, some of the kind of think tanks around the country. And, there's a huge kind of understanding that, Bristol has always been a creative hub. It's now kind of emerging as a tech hub, which is really exciting. We want Bristol to be a green hub. We want this to be a test bed, a lab or a collaboratory for places to come together. Academia, for example, along with sort of developers, and actually test out some of these new technologies and see how they work in a real kind of test environment. So there is every chance that Bristol could be a green tech, clean tech sandbox. Definitely.
Okay. And I think for me as well, one thing I was thinking about is it is a first of its kind in that it's a collaboration between private and public. I think then you don't have the blueprint to follow. So from your side, how do you ensure that you're doing the right thing and that it's going to be successful if you're having to be a trailblazer in this area yourself?
So we've set ourselves some really stringent kind of KPIs around what success looks like for Bristol City Leap, and those are written into the contracts that kind of govern me and all of my colleagues kind of in our day-to-day working, and our relationship with the council as well.
Yeah. And what does success look like on that? So is it going on outcome and how many homes you're within? I know there's a number of segments and areas to this project as well. So
I mean the list of KPIs is like myriad. But I mean I guess at its core, Bristol City Leap is a decarbonisation project. We need to hit those carbon targets. Absolutely. The level of investment to support that decarbonisation is there as well. So that's a marker for how much have we brought in, but in investing, how much of that has supported local social value? How much has that, worked its way through into the local supply chain? Created jobs, paid people a real living wage. All of those bits and pieces. But the other side of it is kind of, I guess, the softer side. So we've got lots of kind of KPIs around social value. So we have a KPI around how much money we're putting into communities, and we have a KPI around, how we've addressed a gender pay gap within, within our organisation, but also through our supply chain. A KPI around ensuring that all of our, kind of supply chain organisations are signed up to the Bristol Equalities Charter. They've all committed to a real living wage, which is incredible. And then a whole heap of commitments around equalities, diversity, and inclusivity. So ensuring that the transition that we make for the city to a decarbonised economy is a just transition. It doesn't leave people behind, within communities or within particular roles in society. So there's a lot there, and I think part of our sort of ethos really is around transparency. So we've committed to putting out an annual statement or a report basically that kind of talks about those KPIs and where we are in our trajectory to kind of hitting those big figures. So it's a great story to tell, and I think it's something that Bristolians will be able to kind of have a really good look at, hopefully fully understand, perhaps in too much detail sometimes, but be able to have that kind of robust discussion with us going forward and help to shape some of our thinking and some of our our business planning on an annual basis.
So almost this concept of building in public. So I know you mentioned the business plan. Is that then open to the public as well for them?
Yeah, there's a summary. Yeah, there's a summary out there on our website. I call it a summary. It's like 35 pages long, so it's long enough.
A short novel.
Yeah, that's it. Enough to get you to sleep of an evening. But so that's kind of out there now. It's been kind of circulated in the last month or so on our website, so people can check it out. And then that will be refreshed annually as well, so people will see kind of an archive of old business plan versus new business plan and where some of those figures have hopefully gone up in the right direction.
And obviously there's a heap of money going into social projects, but how do you measure social value then on the other side of, okay, it's great doing XYZ for the local community and from a, I suppose a financial sense it looks great, but how do you measure the other side of the impact it's making?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the short answer is we can't mark our own homework on this. I think that would be a really difficult place to be in. So we're actually doing this through an independent channel called the Social Value Portal, which is the platform that central government use and many public sector organisations use, and it actually kind of quantifies your kind of social value output. So if say we launched a project tomorrow to install solar panels on a school. You can track the value of the project and the type of the project. It does a very clever algorithm-based calculation with some kind of human fine-tuning as well. But we'll tell you kind of how many jobs that's created, what that's done in terms of local installation, local manufacturing. If there's an educational element built into it as well, have we put a display screen within the school to show real-time generation from that solar array? Have we built in kind of assemblies and kind of road shows for the kids in that school? That all gets tracked within social value, and it actually assigns a monetary figure to it. So
yeah. And I think a quote somebody mentioned to me quite recently actually is the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. But obviously you're carving something out at the moment. You're putting together a blueprint for how this can work. I think maybe outside of Bristol over the next, say, couple of years or even the next 12 months, what would you like to see from what you're doing? Is it a case you'd like to see it replicated, or because it's been such a stringent process which started a handful of years ago?
Yeah.
How would you go about taking what you've created thus far with the Bristol City Leap and seeing it then replicated in other UK or further afield cities?
It's a huge ambition of ours actually to see a leap for every city, essentially. So I mean, central government bays as they were back in the day, until quite recently, have been involved in our process. So, from almost from inception of Bristol City Leap, as kind of observers, really, because they were interested in the concept of, can we find a way of decarbonising cities which doesn't put, the burden on the public purse, basically. And they've been with us throughout that process, as have others as well. We're very closely aligned with kind of UKIB and 3CI and Core Cities, all of these kind of networks of cities and kind of UK governance and leadership to look at this model. And there's so much interest in Bristol City Leap as a blueprint. So it's our strong ambition to create a real ripple effect. And to help other cities on this journey, to create their own Bristol City Leap-esque projects, to show that actually there is an appetite from the private sector out there. There is money to be invested. People are looking for projects to invest in, and there is a genuine offer from local authorities and from the public sector in terms of what they can bring to the table, because it's not always going to be a financial piece that they can bring, but as I said earlier, those kind of levers and assets and kind of city governance and controls and things like that are a huge offering to the private sector, because they don't have those inroads into cities. So it's generating a lot of interest nationally at the moment. Having lots of conversations with other cities, kind of Welsh government we've spoken to, Manchester. And quite a few up north, as well as kind of locally, more sort of down south. I genuinely believe that we've set a real precedent here, and we can as I say, support other people on this journey to create their own similar projects and create that ripple effect.
It's a real anomaly, isn't it? Because you don't have any competitors, so it's not like the standard. And in my head, anyway, and feel free to correct me if you think there may be, but in my head, there's no competitors. So you can be very open, you can be very honest. This is how we're looking to do things, which obviously has massive pros as well, and you can be very almost quite open source with other areas, whether that be councils. Whether that be actual countries and governments, to say this is how we're doing things. What would you say have been your biggest challenges then, if it's not fighting against the competition? What would have been your biggest challenge so far?
Well, I think I just want to pick up on that previous point, actually, because you're absolutely right. We are, to an extent, able to be pretty open source with this. It's a novel concept that many others can benefit from. There is obviously a degree of intellectual property associated with it. So this is, will be a novel concept. There's a lot of kind of, commercial working that's gone into it, not just from, from the procurer's perspective, but from those bidders as well. So they've put lots of time and effort into, developing plans and feeding into that process, which is great and can't be understated. I think what we'd really, really like to see is some funding coming forward from government to say, look, Bristol City Leap, you've got an interesting model. We could take this, we could replicate it, we could have 20, 30, 40 city leaps happening all over the country, and the impact that would have on carbon reduction in the UK would be tremendous. So that's kind of our call at the moment, is that government need to probably put some money in, develop something of a toolkit and a template that can be rolled out to other cities. And I think we've kind of lightheartedly joked with other core cities in the past about decarbonisation, and we set our decarbonisation target at 2030, and Nottingham set theirs at 2028, and it's kind of like, this competition. But in all seriousness, I think decarbonisation is the aim of the game. If Bristol does it by 2030, but no other city does, then we've kind of failed anyway. So we have to share this, have to share it.
Yeah, and so with that, your biggest difficulty is not being able to share, say, all of it. Your biggest difficulty is not get enough collaboration from central government.
I would say the biggest difficulty is that individual cities will not have the funding that Bristol's had to deliver a project like this in isolation. Bristol was very blessed with resources. We had not huge, but we had quite a large energy team by local authority standards. We'd already delivered a great deal of projects, which created a revenue stream to support
And a portfolio of this is what we've done.
Yeah, exactly. And an ability to attract grant funding, which is really, really key. But you have to have proven that you can do it in order to attract more funding. So it's a very competitive area. And I think a challenge for other cities is that they will not be in a position to spend the money that we did on the procurement. To be able to do the initial feasibility. They probably won't have the resource or even the expertise in some circumstances to fully understand the energy opportunities within their region. So I think all cities need support with this.
Yeah. And do you think just being a first of its kind it kind of touches on that, to be honest, which Bristol's got, like you said, there are a handful of factors going for it anyway, which was already building towards this point, albeit unknowingly.
Yeah.
But do you think it being its first, say, official of its kind actually helped because people wanted to be part of that journey? Or do you think if 5 other cities in the UK had done it and then you came up, do you think you would have still got the level of traction that you have succeeded with so far?
I think it's difficult to say. I think if 5 other cities had done it, they'd have probably made, had a great deal of learning, I suppose, that we could have taken on board. Probably shaved some time off of the process in setting this thing up, which would have been, helpful, I suppose, from a decarbonisation targets perspective. But it is, it is useful to be a first mover. It kind of, it shines a light on Bristol. It's great for the Bristol reputation. It's great for, continuing that, as I said earlier, kind of that innovative pioneering streak that our city's always had, and, taking it into the next industrial revolution, the green industrial revolution. So yeah, I think it's a positive thing, definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to fire away at you today. But
Thanks.
Was there anything else that might? I know there's all sorts coming, but I suppose it really goes down to how much you can share. But was there anything else that you wanted to share now, which might help the audience, might help you in terms of traction of things going on?
I think it really depends when this goes out, actually. But we've obviously kind of just launched. We are soon to be throughout kind of end of April up until the end of May, running a series of kind of community-centric kind of roadshows. So mini launch events, essentially, in a number of areas. So kind of Lockleys, Southmead.
All within Bristol. That roadshows all within Bristol.
All within Bristol, yeah. I think, Avonmouth. Yeah, you name it. It's a real memory test, actually. There's 5 in total at different dates in the diary. I'd really urge Bristolians to get involved, sign up to one of the events, come along, hear what we've got to say, ask questions, throw ideas at us as well. Is really, really important. And on ideas, I suppose the other side of it is we have very much an open door policy. So we've kind of made this really clear to community organisations and community energy organisations that we want to hear from them. We have some ideas around how things can be delivered and done in the city, but we don't know everything. And actually, we'd really, really value a continuation of that conversation and people throwing, fresh ideas at us and starting to, expand that debate, I think, further into other areas of the city that might not have been engaged previously.
Yeah, and because you need that collaboration as well, and be that of just an everyday person, or be that local businesses that might have, say, a workforce or expertise in this space. Awesome. Well, I think we're going to be airing it in a few weeks' time, and typically we air every Thursday, every 2 weeks. We air an episode. And I imagine this will be out for the listeners. We'll have to trim this part out, but it'll be out in around 6 weeks' time. So we've got a couple of episodes lined up, and then we'll be shooting this one out. And then what we'll do is we'll also, Tristan, the magician over there, he will pull out a couple of social clips as well. So from that, we can send them over and share to yourself, because I imagine they'd be nice. There'll be a couple there which might be nice for sharing on LinkedIn, especially, as an awesome place.
Yeah.
engaging businesses there. But some of it for maybe, I know you've done really well in regards to some paperwork for educating the masses and helping there. But it might, some of the content might help just to push out in person as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to help promote the podcast as well. So yeah, just give us a shout when you're ready.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciated you coming on today, James.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
been a lot of
Thank
fun
you very
actually.
much.
It's a lovely environment.